Let me tell you something about Paul before we get into the letters. Because most people hear the name Paul the Apostle, and they picture some kind of quiet, robed figure sitting peacefully at a wooden desk, writing thoughtful letters by candlelight with plenty of time on his hands. That is not who Paul was. Not even close. Paul was a man who got shipwrecked 3 times, who was beaten with rods, who was stoned by a crowd and left for dead on the side of a road, who spent years being chased from city to city by people who wanted him arrested, silenced, or worse. A man who, by his own account in one of his letters, was in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger in the city, in danger in the wilderness, and in danger from people he thought were his own friends. And in between all of that, the shipwrecks, the beatings, the prison cells, the constant travel, he sat down and wrote letters. 13 of them that we still have today. Letters that became the foundation of Christian theology. Letters that were being read out loud in churches across the Roman Empire while the ink on them was barely dry. Letters that people have been studying, arguing about, and building entire belief systems around for 2,000 years. Now here is something most people do not know, and I think it is the most important thing to understand before we go through the letters one by one. The New Testament you have in your hand right now, the one where Paul's letters appear, those letters are not in the order Paul wrote them. They are in order by length. Longest letter first, shortest letter last. Romans goes first not because Paul wrote it first, but because it is the longest. Philemon comes near the end not because it was the last thing Paul wrote, but because it is one of the shortest. So if you have ever tried to read Paul's letters in Bible order and felt confused, like the story was jumping around, like things were being referenced that hadn't been explained yet, that is why. You were reading them out of order, like watching a movie that starts at the ending and jumps back to the middle before showing you the beginning. Today, we are going to go through them in order. The order Paul actually wrote them, as best as scholars have been able to figure out. And by the end, you're going to understand not just what each letter says, but who Paul was when he wrote it, what was happening in his life at that moment, and why that context changes everything about how the words land. Let us start at the beginning. The first letter Paul ever wrote, the first one we have, anyway, was not Romans. It was not Corinthians. It was a short letter to a small group of new believers in a city called Thessalonica, written around 49 to 51 AD. To understand why he wrote it, you need to understand the situation. Paul had visited Thessalonica not long before, had spent a few weeks there teaching and building a small community of new Christians, and had then been forced to leave suddenly because a mob was threatening his life. He left in a hurry, before he felt the work was finished, worried about what would happen to these new believers he was leaving behind. Would they hold on to their faith without him? Were they being persecuted? Were they okay? So he wrote them a letter, 1 Thessalonians. And it is one of the warmest things Paul ever wrote, genuinely affectionate, full of relief and encouragement. He tells them he has been thinking about them constantly, that he was so worried he could not stand it anymore, that he sent his companion Timothy to check on them, and was overwhelmed with relief when Timothy came back with good news. But there is a serious question buried in the letter too. Some of the believers in Thessalonica had died since Paul left, and the people left behind were worried. Does dying before Jesus returns mean you miss out? Paul addresses this directly and clearly. No, the dead in Christ will rise first. Nobody is left behind. This is the kind of question that tells you something important about where these early Christians were in their thinking. They genuinely believed Jesus was coming back soon. Like, within their lifetimes soon. The question was not a theoretical one. It was urgent and personal. And Paul's answer, written from the road, probably in between traveling to the next city, became one of the most important passages in all of Christian writing about death and resurrection. Shortly after, he wrote 2 Thessalonians to correct a misunderstanding his first letter had apparently created. Some people had heard, Jesus is coming back, and concluded that meant Jesus is coming back right now. So stop working, stop planning, just wait. Paul writes back with some frustration and tells them to calm down. Certain things have to happen first. The man of sin has to be revealed. A great falling away has to occur. In the meantime, get back to work. Stop being a burden to everyone around you. 2 letters, 2 fires to put out. And Paul was just getting started. Next came Galatians, written somewhere around 48 to 52 AD, and the temperature in this one is completely different. Paul is not warm and gentle here. He is furious, genuinely, openly angry in a way that is rare for him. Here is what had happened. Paul had traveled through a region called Galatia, had founded churches there, had taught these people that salvation comes through faith in Jesus, not through following the Jewish law. not through circumcision, not through the hundreds of specific rules that had defined Jewish religious practice for centuries. He had been clear about this. Faith, not works. Grace, not law. And then after he left, other teachers had shown up and told the Galatians the opposite. Paul got it wrong. They said, you do need to follow the Jewish law. You do need to be circumcised. Faith alone is not enough. Paul hears about this, and his response is immediate and scalding. He opens the letter by saying he is astonished, genuinely astonished, that they had abandoned the gospel so quickly. He calls the people spreading this alternative message troublemakers. He says, and this is one of the most direct statements in all of his letters, that even if an angel from heaven came and preached a different gospel, that angel should be considered cursed. This letter is the foundation of the Protestant Reformation. Here is where the story changes setting. Paul eventually made his way to Jerusalem, was arrested on accusations of teaching against Jewish law and the temple, and after a long and complicated legal process was transported to Rome as a prisoner. He spent years in Roman custody, first under a relatively comfortable house arrest, later under far harsher conditions. And he kept writing. The 4 letters he wrote during this period are called the prison epistles: Philippians, Colossians, Ephesians, and Philemon. They share a certain quality that is different from the earlier letters. Less fire, more depth. Less crisis management, more reflection. The tone of a man who has stopped running from city to city and has been forced, by circumstance, to sit still and think. Philippians is one of the most joyful things Paul ever wrote, which is remarkable given that he was writing it from prison. He tells the church at Philippi to rejoice. Not once. 4 times in 4 chapters, he comes back to it. Rejoice. And again I say, rejoice. He says he has learned, in whatever state he is in, to be content. He has known both plenty and need, and has found a way to function in both. The peace of God, he says, passes all understanding. There is something about reading those words and knowing they were written in a cell that gives them a weight that they would not have if Paul had written them from a comfortable house, with a full stomach and nothing to worry about. He is not describing a theory of contentment. He is describing a practice he had been forced to develop under real pressure. Colossians addresses a different problem: philosophical ideas that were mixing with Christian teaching in ways Paul found dangerous. Certain teachers were promoting a kind of spiritual hierarchy, a system of special knowledge and angelic beings that had to be navigated before one could truly approach God. Paul's response is simple and absolute. Jesus is sufficient. There is no intermediary hierarchy, no special knowledge required. Christ is above all things, the full image of the invisible God, and nothing else needs to be added to that. Ephesians takes these ideas and expands them into something vast and cosmic. This is Paul writing about the church not as a collection of specific people with specific problems, but as something that existed in the mind of God before the world was created. It is his most majestic writing, full of long sentences that pile clause upon clause in a way that seems to be straining against the limits of what language can express. He is trying to describe something he finds almost indescribable, the mystery hidden for ages, now revealed. That Jew and Gentile, slave and free, all of humanity is being drawn together into one new thing. And then Philemon, the shortest of the prison epistles, and one of the most human. It is a personal letter to a specific man about a specific situation. A slave named Onesimus had run away from his owner Philemon, had somehow encountered Paul in prison, had become a Christian, and was now being sent back. Paul writes to Philemon on Onesimus's behalf. He does not command. He asks. He says Onesimus is now more than a slave. He is a brother. He asks Philemon to receive him back not as property, but as a person. He even offers to personally pay any debt Onesimus owes. It is a small letter, for short paragraphs. But it contains, in compressed form, one of the most radical ideas in Paul's entire body of work, that the categories that divided people in the ancient world, the categories of owner and owned, of citizen and slave, were being fundamentally disrupted by the community that formed around Jesus. Paul was eventually released from his first Roman imprisonment. He traveled again, to Macedonia, to Crete, possibly to Spain. And then he was arrested again, this time under far more serious charges, in conditions far harsher than before. He knew he was not going to survive this imprisonment. During this final period, he wrote 3 letters that are called the pastoral epistles: 1 Timothy, Titus, and 2 Timothy. They are different from everything else he wrote. Less theological argument, more practical instruction. The tone of a senior leader passing the work on to the next generation. First Timothy is addressed to a young pastor named Timothy, whom Paul had been mentoring for years. Timothy was leading the church in Ephesus, and he was struggling. Paul writes him detailed instructions on church organization, how to choose leaders, how to handle specific types of disputes, how to manage the practical life of a congregation. Some of it is mundane, some of it is sharp. Throughout, Paul is pushing Timothy to take his responsibility seriously, to not let anyone look down on him for his youth, to watch both his life and his doctrine carefully. Titus is similar, a set of instructions for another young leader Paul had left in charge of churches on the island of Crete. Paul's assessment of the Cretans is blunt to the point of being almost funny. He quotes a Cretan writer who described his own people as liars and lazy, and says, "Yeah, that tracks. Work with what you have. Appoint good leaders. Teach sound doctrine. Keep the ship together." And then 2 Timothy, the last letter Paul ever wrote. He is back in Rome, back in prison, this time in the Mamertine, a stone dungeon dug into the ground. The conditions are harsh, and his situation is desperate. He knows he is approaching execution. He writes to Timothy one final time, and this letter is unlike anything else in the collection. He asks Timothy to come to him, to bring Mark, to bring his cloak and his books, specifically the parchments. Even in his final days, he wants to read. He names people who have abandoned him and warns Timothy about them. He names people who have stayed faithful and sends greetings from them. He tells Timothy to keep going, to keep preaching, to be ready in season and out of season. And near the end, he writes the most personal statement of his entire body of work. He says he has fought the good fight. He has finished the race. He has kept the faith. He is ready. That is how it ends. Not with a theological treatise, not with instructions for the next generation, with a man at the end of his life saying simply, "I did what I came to do." Now, you have made it through 13 letters spanning nearly 20 years of one of the most remarkable lives in the ancient world. So let me tell you what I actually want you to walk away with. Not the theology, not the arguments about which letters Paul actually wrote versus which ones came from his followers writing in his name after his death. Those debates are real and interesting, and you can spend years going deep on them if you want to. What I want you to see is the shape of a life. Paul started as the opposite of what he became. He was educated, credentialed, connected, a rising figure in the religious establishment of his day. He was not an outsider looking for a cause. He was an insider with status to protect. And then something happened to him on a road outside Damascus that turned every single one of his priorities upside down. He went from hunting Christians to being hunted for being one. He went from enforcing the religious consensus to being the most disruptive force against it. And for the rest of his life, probably another 20 to 30 years after that road to Damascus, he ran toward every closed door. Every city that drove him out, he went to the next one. Every letter that landed wrong, he wrote another one trying to correct it. Every church that fell into division or confusion, he engaged with it rather than giving up on it. He did not build a quiet life. He did not find a safe city and stay there. He kept moving, kept writing, kept showing up. And the letters he left behind, written in urgency, written from prison, written in grief and in joy and in anger, and in the desperate hope that the words would arrive before everything fell apart. Those letters outlasted everything. They outlasted Rome. They outlasted the emperors who imprisoned him. They outlasted the opponents who thought they had silenced him. 2,000 years later, people are still arguing about what he meant, which is perhaps the most complete form of victory a writer can achieve. There is something in that story that applies to everyone who has ever felt like the situation was against them. Paul did not write the Philippians letter about contentment from a place of comfort. He wrote it from a prison cell. He did not write the passage about love in a moment of peace. He wrote it to a church that was coming apart at the seams. The most durable things get written under pressure. The most important messages get sent when sending them is the hardest. Whatever you are carrying right now, whatever situation you are in the middle of, whatever letter you need to write, whatever next step feels too hard to take, I want you to remember that the man who wrote half the New Testament did most of his best work in chains. That is the story of Paul. I will see you in the next one.